Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to another installment of the No Trade Clause podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Washington, joined by Nathan Grubel of Draft Deeper, the Twitter page. These guys do a lot of great work over there, just gathering a lot of information about draft picks. They throw some polls up there. If you guys are conflicted about, who should be drafted highest, you might want to avoid their page. They got a lot of interesting questions that throw up there, but really insightful stuff, really great information. Love what you guys do, Nathan. I'm glad we finally got to set this up. It's been a little while in the making, but better late than never. It's getting to be draft time. The playoffs are in full swing, so I figured this is the best time to jump on with you, man. So I appreciate you being here.
Always happy, Aaron, to jump on with someone, another person, an individual, as well as a collective who is someone who is very much so in tune with what the basketball community needs. What you guys do over at No Trade Clause, the website, incredibly impressive work. All of your cap sheets, breakdowns, everything has been a tool that I've been able to use, as well as my other analysts at NoCeilingsNBA.com. So certainly, Aaron, it's a pleasure for me to be able to be on and have some conversations with you.
I love to hear that, man. That's what we're here for, to provide resources for basketball fans. Some fans are interested in the cap sheets. Some fans are interested in the upcoming draft picks and getting some film on them, getting some information. So, we're just breaking it down. There's a lot of different parts to basketball, and, just glad that we can kind of come together on this one and collaborate a little bit. So always fun to see that. So to get into the conversation here, Nathan, let's go ahead and start off with a couple of recent draftees. So these aren't necessarily rookies, but with the playoffs in full swing, I took a look at the rosters here, and most of the time you'll see veteran guys and teams rotations going through the playoffs. You'll see guys that have been in the league for a little bit, have that experience under their belt. They're more trusted guys. They've been through the gauntlet a little bit. Obviously, they're going to get the most amount of run. However, there are a few players in these playoffs. Just in the last series in the first round, we had a couple of guys, Keegan Murray, Davion Mitchell. They made some noise against the Warriors. Didn't make it out, but I think our perception of those two players greatly improved over that course of that series. So now in the second round, we have a couple of guys that are making impacts. Their numbers aren't going to jump off the screen. They're not going to come in here averaging 20 points a game. They're not shooting 60% from three. They're not going to blow up the team's numbers or anything like that. However, they have been definitely contributors in a great way for their teams. Both of these guys are a little bit underrated, in my opinion. They've come in, they're both, more of the wing type of player. They do the little things. They've gained the trust of their coaches just by being in the right place at the right time, high basketball IQ. So I wanted to highlight them here real quick. And then obviously we can tie that into the playoff series as a whole and see how that's going so far. I definitely want to get your opinions on this here, Nathan. So first player we'll be discussing, he's actually about to play here in the next 20 minutes while we're recording this podcast. Quentin Grimes is our first player of the day. He's a wing for the New York Knicks. I actually placed him on my taxi squad spot in my Dynasty Basketball League. He was more of a draft and stash. I was tempted to take him off that list because I saw his numbers throughout the season. He was dropping 20-point games, a 25-pointer here and there, hitting a bunch of threes, getting some steals. And I was tempted. I'm like, hey, maybe I should activate this guy. He's really making noise out here. But, I decided against it. I wanted to let him kind of get his feet wet a little bit more. However, he has remained a mainstay in Tibbs' rotation here in the playoffs for the Knicks, regardless of whether or not they make it out of this round. I think Quentin Grimes has had a fabulous season. He started off a little bit slow. I think he had some injury issues in the very beginning part of the season. We got over those and came into the playoffs here. And, it's been a struggle against the Heat. I mean, but hey, most people struggle against the Heat in that great defense they have going over there. Nonetheless, Grimes has been a bright spot for the Knicks, and I think he deserves a lot of praise. So I wanted to go ahead and highlight him, give him some love. And now I want to pass the torch here over to you, Nathan. What are a couple of parts of Quentin Grimes' game that really impressed you the most? And just want to get your overall thoughts on this series. What have you kind of gathered from this Heat-Knicks showdown here so far through?
Oh, man. So in particular, Aaron, I will say about Quentin Grimes, you're going to notice a pattern between this guy and certainly the next player that we will talk about as we move past the Knicks and the Heat. But these young guys we want to talk about, what's getting them on the floor. It's defense, first and foremost, and then it's the shooting value that they can provide, right? So Quentin Grimes in particular, he's become a different player than he was initially when he was recruited to go to Kansas, right? Had that initial freshman year where we didn't exactly know what to fully expect from him, came out of the gates, had that awesome game in Madison Square Garden, and then his numbers and his performance overall kind of fell off from there. He had to realize that he wasn't going to be that on-ball dynamo, right? That primary creator, someone who you're funneling the offense through. He transformed his game completely, especially during his time at Houston, become an off-ball guy, right? Become one of the best shooters in his draft class and really embrace defending the point guard position as well as the 2 and the 3. And look at what he's been able to do in the NBA, right? He's certainly taken those skills, and that's who he's been. He has been a 1 through 3 defender for the New York Knicks. He's been one of their better three-point shooters, particularly spacing from the corners, right? The New York Knicks need offense. They need shooting. And so I'm really glad that Tom Thibodeau went down into his bench and he gave Grimes more opportunity as the season went on. And look what it's done for the Knicks, right? It's amazing what happens sometimes when you play the young, talented guys and you start giving them some experience. It's why, Aaron, I wouldn't fault you for having him as a draft and stash guy in your fantasy league, because we don't know what Tibbs is going to do with the young guys most of the time, right? So that wasn't a bad move by you, but now that he's gotten some time, some good experience in the playoffs, you're right. His numbers aren't jumping off the page to you, but he is playing starters level minutes. He's in that starting rotation for the Knicks. That should say everything that needs to be said about his game, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. You're able to put him on somebody like a Gabe Vincent. You're able to put him at times on somebody like a Jimmy Butler. You're able to put him all over the floor on that perimeter, right around that three-point line, having that kind of asset for you defensively. It's something that not a lot of these other guys who are looked at as scores for the Knicks are giving you, right? You're not getting that out of Jalen Brunson. You're not getting that from Emmanuel Quickly. You need someone who can do that for you. Grimes has been that guy, and even though he hasn't necessarily lit it up, he has hit a few big shots in this series and have helped the Knicks stay afloat to be right now, even going after a Game 5 and hopefully for Knicks fans' sake, a Game 6, right? So we'll see what happens after this game tonight, but overall in the series, Aaron, listen, we know the story about Knicks, right? That he'd have the best player on the floor in Jimmy Butler, right? Even though he's been hurt, he's delivered in a big way on both ends, particularly spacing the floor, and those mid-range jumpers are from 3, which is something that I guess he only whips out for the playoffs. He doesn't like to do that in the regular season.
So,
his shot charts are so different, right? Between both sets of games. It's amazing, but when he turns it on, he can be as effective as any of these other guys, and it certainly is one of the best players we have in the NBA. You've got Kyle Lowry, you got Max Strus, Martin, you got Gabe Vincent, all helping to give Jimmy and Bam more of the perimeter depth they need to score. But in terms of why I think the series is 3-1 and not 2-2, or even a direction in the Knicks' favor, the Knicks were a team that excelled in the regular season because of how physical they were, right? How they would win battles on the glass, how they would win battles deterring and ultimately blocking shots on the interior. You haven't gotten that from their big men. And in particular, Aaron, I'm sure you've been watching these last 2 games. Julius Randle hasn't done what we know he can do, right? Between the poor shooting in Game 3 and then all the defensive miscues and turnovers in Game 4, you have Knicks fans looking around and going, forget this series. Are we sure we even want Julius Randle on our team next year and beyond that because of how long his contract extends out to? So they're in a fascinating spot. They really need him to step up in a big way and support Brunson. You need a better game from Mitchell Robinson. You need to be able to find something off the bench, whether that's Hartenstein, whether they go to somebody like a Jericho Sims even deeper down their bench to give them a little bit more physicality on the boards. But that's really the biggest thing to me, is they're not getting any possessions back. And if all you're going to do is give possessions to the Miami Heat, one of the best teams at executing offense in the half court under Coach Spo, you're probably not going to win a lot of games.
Exactly. You just hit it right on the head, man. All those points are excellent. There's an article that was put out by Mark Schindler over at Uprocks here recently. Mark. Yeah, Mark is awesome, man. He's another friend of the pod, so we love his work over here. But recently, he just put up an article about how the Heat have twisted the Knicks' advantage against them. So the Knicks, as we know in that first round series against the Cavs, they were dominating the boards. They were absolutely abusing the front line of Mobley and Allen repeatedly, game after game. Mm-hmm. Mitch Robinson looked like the second coming of Wilt Chamberlain down there. I mean, it was incredible. I couldn't believe my eyes. And there's a lot of questions on Twitter floating around saying, how did this Knicks team beat the Cavs in 5 games? And how they could possibly lose in 5 games. And honestly, I think the big difference between these two teams, talking about the Cavs and the Heat, is just experience. Like,
Exactly. Yep.
if we're looking at Allen and Garland and Mobley, like, these guys haven't been here before. Who was it? I think it was Allen that mentioned that the lights were brighter than expected. I think when he was asked recently about the playoffs, so they weren't ready, honestly. They came in, they weren't ready to adjust to what the Knicks were doing. They didn't have the right counters. They didn't push the right buttons. The Heat have no such problems. I think Spoelstra might be the best coach in the league when it comes to making adjustments on the fly. And he's so creative. No matter what the situation calls for, he has something in his back pocket ready to dish out to counteract what the team is, what the opposition is doing. And in this case, it's like, hey, you guys are tough. You play with a lot of energy and force. Josh Hart, Quentin Grimes, Randall, like, they like to get in your face and muck it up. And the Heat are like, well, we can do that just a little bit better than you do.
Exactly, right?
That's their MO. I mean, they were groomed all season long to win close games. I mean, I think they've had the most clutch games in the NBA all season long. I think they had in the mid-30s as far as clutch games that are within 5 points with 5 minutes left. So when these first few games of the series came down to the last few possessions, the Heat were ready. They knew what to do. And then when it comes down to games that are won like 95 to 100 or 88 to 97, something like that, like, those are the games that the Heat usually win more often than not. So they're just equipped to deal with what the Knicks are doing. As you mentioned, Randall is not looking like itself. They have defenders to throw at Brunson. I think that's another key difference between the Cavs and the Heat. The Heat.
You have guys on the Heat though, Aaron. They just want it more, man. And this is really something that's been special about the Heat organization, and it's why our work over at No Ceilings and beyond, anyone in the draft community putting out work, it's why it's so important. Because sure, you have the Butlers, the Kevin Loves, the Bam Adebayos, and then you have all these guys like Gabe Vincent, like Max Strus, Duncan Robinson, Haywood Highsmith, Caleb Martin and Cody Martin, right? They weren't necessarily the highest regarded coming out of Nevada, even though they were talented. You just go down the list, and they're getting these aren't just guys who are coming in putting up 2 points, 4 points, 6 points every now and then, right? Caleb Martin had a massive game for Miami already in the series. Max Strus had some massive games in the last round for Miami. Gabe Vincent's been playing phenomenal this entire playoffs. Outside of last game, really was the only true stinker he had, I think, on both sides of the ball. But even he's been shooting pretty well and certainly playing defense at that point of attack. So they're getting contributions from guys who we didn't expect to be in this spot in the NBA. And that's a lot of that credit is not only to the players for how hard they've wanted to come in and work to be something of themselves, but also Coach Spo for organizing the troops.
Exactly, man. I mean, that's what it comes down to, just putting guys in a position to succeed. The Heat don't have many high-profile guys, as you mentioned. A lot of them aren't drafted. They're later in the first round. But Spo just knows how to put them in positions to be the best version of themselves. Let's run Max off of endless dribble handoffs and down screens to get him space. Let's let Gabe Vincent just throw that ball up there, even though there'll be some bad shots in there every now and again. Let's let Bam run wild and set a bunch of screens. Like, guys are just in the right place at the right time. And not that the Knicks guys don't know how to do that, but it's just it's one thing to do it well. It's another thing to come in here and do it at an even higher level, with the Heat are accustomed to doing, not just this season, but probably for the last 3 or 4 seasons. I mean, for a long time, this is what they've done. So it shouldn't be any surprise that they're thriving off of this type of play.
It shouldn't be. No surprises.
Not at all. Speaking of tough play, we can get over and look at this other recent draftee who's been making noise with his play and the way he's been grinding out minutes for Michael Malone over there in Denver. Christian Braun is our next player we want to highlight here. Another guy that I don't think many people thought much of when he was drafted, when he came in with the Nuggets. It's like, hey, they have KCP, they have Bruce Brown, they have Jamal Murray, they have all these guys. Like, where does Christian fit in? All of a sudden, we get to the All-Star break, post-All-Star break, leading up to the playoffs. Hey, that Christian Braun guy is actually not bad. He's doing some good things on the court. He's getting some minutes for a team that's number 1 in the conference. Yep. That's no small feat. So Christian Braun is a bigger wing. I think he's about 6'7", has some size, and he's a great cutter. He knows how to move off the ball. You got to know how to move off the ball if you're playing with Nikola Jokic, right? Yep. I mean, I think that's a prerequisite if you're on that team, I would imagine. So he knows where to be off the ball, takes good shots, makes good decisions. So for a guy like him, I mean, this has been awesome to see. And he's just a testament to the type of depth that the Nuggets have built. And that's the reason why they are one game away from taking the Suns out of the playoffs here now, just because they have so many guys, so many waves that come at you. The Suns don't quite have that. So that's been the difference for them. So when it comes to the Nuggets and Suns here, Nathan, I mean, are you thinking this series is over with the way the Nuggets have taken control here so far?
I think so, right? So Jokic has continued to be one of the best players in the world throughout the playoffs, right? We know what he's going to do, but even last game, that triple-double, it's just cementing him as, okay, this is a guy who is certainly built to not only win in the regular season, but to actually carry a team through the playoffs, right? And for what the Nuggets haven't done over the last few years, especially in that bubble run where they had a chance to go to the finals, I don't fault Jokic for any of that. Quite frankly, I don't really fault Murray for a lot of it either. I just don't think the Nuggets had the depth behind those two guys to really make noise then. They do have that depth now, right? You have Michael Porter Jr. back fully healthy, hitting shots for them. You have an Aaron Gordon who you didn't have last time here with you in the trenches. Some guy who, as you pointed out, Aaron, the type of players you want around Jokic, right? That's Aaron Gordon to a T. You have guys like KCP coming in. You have Brown, who I'm going to talk about in a second. You have Bruce Brown, who we can talk about. You have Jeff Green, right? Like the depth to this squad. It's not that they have a ton of size outside of Jokic, which depending on the type of matchup, a la the Lakers potentially next round, should they ultimately beat the Phoenix Suns, that could prove to be a little problematic if you can get Jokic in foul trouble. But even though they don't have that, they have so much skill and shooting at all of these other positions. And in particular, you have multiple guys who I trust to defend at the highest level. I trust Aaron Gordon to go out there and cover whoever he needs to. I trust KCP to go out there and guard whoever he needs to. Jeff Green, for all of some of his shortcomings throughout his career and not being the most consistent player, if it's one game, ride or die, I still trust Jeff Green to go out there and do his job. And now you have Christian Brown, who he's another guy like Quentin Grimes, who is not putting up these awesome counting numbers. But what's he doing, Aaron? He's on the floor because he's playing defense. And he's not just playing defense on guys who are away from the ball, or maybe they're running off a few screens or coming to catch it in a secondary action. He is guarding the guys who they're going to have their ball in their hands at the end of possessions, right? He's actually doing a decent job on guys like Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. And you wouldn't look to a rookie to be able to do those things for you. Yet here comes Christian Brown, who once upon a time, he was a guy I actually really liked in the draft, Aaron. He was a guy who I may not have had him inside my top 15 on my board, but anyone out there who listened to Draft Deeper, if you want to go back and go through the Draft Deeper archives, you know that myself and our other guy, No Ceilings, Tyler Rucker, we always talked about how Brown just knew how to play the game at Kansas. He did all of the little things. He was competitive. He was tough as nails. You look at his synergy profile on both sides of the ball. He absolutely nailed it. Anything you would want from an off-ball player who could handle the ball in secondary pick and roll situations, handle in transition. That's exactly who Christian was for that team. And now look at how it's translated into the NBA. Sometimes, even though it's not the most conventional, or he's not the guy who's necessarily always jumping out of the gym, or maybe he doesn't fully look the part of this switchable wing, maybe sometimes we just need to look at the tape and trust what the guy is doing in front of us, and trust the production.
The eye test. I mean, the eye test can tell you a whole bunch about a player, a lot of which the box score won't tell you. So that's definitely an important component of scouting guys, regardless of whether they've already been drafted, they're coming through the draft process. I mean, you said it exactly right on that point. So, I mean, yeah, Christian Braun has been awesome so far. I love the way he's not afraid of the moment. A lot of rookies come in and you can just see they look like a deer in headlights. They're like, all right, am I doing this right? Am I in the right place? This is a good shot. They second guess. I haven't noticed Christian second guessing that much on the basketball court. And I think that's one of the reasons why he does get more run. He's not afraid of making a mistake and getting yanked. I mean, that's just not part of his game. He's going to come in. He's going to work hard. It's like, hey, if I take a bad shot, I make a bad rotation, like, so be it. It's just a part of the game. So he's not rattled. And that's how a lot of this team operates. This Denver team, I think this is the strongest Denver iteration in the past few years, just based on the way they just keep competing. They keep coming at you. I haven't noticed this team get down by 15 and mail it in. They had a very strong comeback. I want to say it was game 4. I think they got down by a decent amount when they were in Phoenix, and they rallied and almost won that game. this team is extremely tough, and they don't give up very easily. So
they're resilient. And the other thing too about the Nuggets is you're not going to stop them, right? They are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to execute at a high level. So if you are the Phoenix Suns, you need to find a way to outscore them any way, shape, or form. And it's why, thank goodness Coach Monty finally decided to go to some guys like Landry Shamet, in particular, Terrence Ross, who was getting no minutes for this Phoenix Suns team since they brought him in, a guy who has been sitting in Orlando for years there, and he's been putting up 16, 18 points per game seasons. I get that he can be a liability on the defensive side of the ball, but if you just need guys who can come in and get buckets and keep you certainly ahead in games, right? Help to maintain leads or shoot you back into a game. Terrence Ross is a really good guy to have off your bench to be able to do that. So I get the mindset of you come into the playoffs. Ideally, you want like a really tight 8-man group. You don't want to go deeper into your bench, but if the answers aren't there in front of you, don't be afraid to go to some guys like Terrence Ross, who he may not have worlds of playoff experience because of where he was, but he's been in some big moments and he's hit some tough shots, and he's been one of the more consistent offensive producers in the NBA throughout his career. So that's a move. It boggles my mind why he didn't go to somebody like that sooner. But nevertheless, maybe it's a move that you're getting those guys more acclimated now. They're coming back to Phoenix in Game 6. Maybe they can make it really interesting. You get more out of your role players at home. Maybe we can see what happens in a Game 7. All
they need to do is get to Game 7, because at that point, I'll bet who knows what's going to happen at that point. But yeah, just I wanted to bounce off that point with the Suns situation and their depth and their rotation. I mean, it is interesting to see how guys are starting to kind of creep their way in, because Monty realizes that after the first couple of games in the series where the bench was pretty much zero, like he was getting almost nothing from the bench in terms of just points per game, he realized got to change something up. Landry Shamet comes in Game 4, they get like 15 or so points off the bench. I mean, that's the kind of stuff they were missing. Torrey Craig gave them that a decent amount in the regular season. Hasn't translated so far. Josh Okogie was giving them that earlier in the season. That hasn't really been there. So he's had to kind of reach deeper into the bag of those reserve guys. And luckily, they stepped up a little bit. So I do think it's the right decision to play more minutes for guys like Terrence Ross. I mean, had the same thought. I was like, these guys are on the bench, and why not try it? I mean, you're almost completely up against the wall where you're running out of chances. You got to try something new. What's the saying? The craziest thing you can do, or the dumbest thing you can do, is do the same thing over and over and expect the same results. I believe this way it goes. I mean, at some point you got to adjust, and luckily he's done that. I just hope it's not too little, too late. Going back to Phoenix, they do have an opportunity. Don't have to worry about KD. Don't have to worry about Book. They're going to be there. Ayton, to an extent, will be there. It's about the other guy.
We made it this long without bashing DeAndre Ayton and maybe not mentioning how Jock Landale, by the eye test, has been pound for pound potentially a more productive player in this series. But yeah, that's the other big thing is that man's got to do something for us, right? He's got to get going somehow.
Yep. I feel bad for Ayton in a way, because he finds himself in a situation where if you have Chris Paul before the injury and Book and KD and these other guys, I mean, your touches are going to be very hard to come by. And I think he knows he has more to contribute if he just got more opportunities. They're just not going to be there very often for him. So he's had to find ways to impact the game in different aspects, with the rebounding, with the defense. And it's been there here and there, but if there was just a dominant game where he came in and dropped 15 and like a Von Looney game, like, can you drop 12 and 18, something like that, or 5 blocks? I mean, that would be pretty incredible to see from Ayton. That could really make the difference. So we'll see if he can step up in this next game. But regardless, it's going to be the bench. If you got a bench, you got a chance. If you don't, maybe not.
If this Suns team had Kevon Looney, don't you think they'd probably be up right now? Don't you think the shoe would be on the other foot?
Really could. Because if you think about it, it's like, okay, Ayton is a superior player offensively, but like, how often does he display that other than an occasional jump shot? So really it comes down to the intangibles. And I think Looney has that just as much, if not more, than DeAndre Ayton does. So it's a good point. So we've talked a lot about these two players so far, Quentin Grimes, and then after him, Christian Braun for the Denver Nuggets. Christian was a rookie drafted 21st overall in 2022. We want to continue that theme here a little bit with a couple of teams that were just announced yesterday. These are going to be all rookie teams for 22-23 season. So let's go ahead and start with the first team and look at what these guys have done so far and, see what you think about these teams here. So, of course, we have the first team, which is going to be Banchero, Kessler, Mathurin, Murray, and Williams. Not to be mistaken for the alternate Jalen Williams. We're talking about J-Dub guys, so I want to be sure we're on the same page there. Mm-hmm. So these 5 guys really made a lot of noise for their respective teams. Banchero helped lead a resurgent Magic team who had a very impressive season. Even though they didn't make the playoffs, they were awesome. Kessler was a great fill-in. He was a Rudy Gobert Jr., came in right off the bat, blocked a lot of shots, deterred guys at the rim, kept guys from getting good looks there in the paint. So he did a lot of great things for him. Almost made the playoffs, almost made the play-in. So that was impressive. Mathurin came in as a bench spark plug and produced games where he had 15 to 20 points off the bench. Looks like a budding star shot creator, a guy that can come in and get instant offense and be a very positive offensive player, especially with his athleticism. He's such a fun player to watch. When it comes to Keegan Murray, I mean, we saw what he did in that Kings-Warriors series. He was a really plus floor spacer, a great catch-and-shoot player, does the little things in offense, moves without the ball pretty well, and just knows where to be on a basketball court. And, of course, J-Dub. I mean, he was making some noise for possibly being in the Rookie of the Year hunt a little bit towards the end. It didn't happen, obviously, but he had a fantastic season and almost helped the Thunder get back to the playoffs after a few years out of the mix. So, for me, I think I'm good on the first team. There were a couple of discussions on Twitter I saw about Jaden Ivey being a part of that first team. I think that would have been fine too, but honestly, the way it was written, I think it was a good pick there. Do you have any disputes with that first team, or does it look pretty solid to you?
So what I was able to do for No Ceilings this year was on our website, I actually put together our rookie rank, right? And so I did 4 editions of the rookie rank that ultimately built to how I would structure my final all rookie ballot, right? If I had a ballot, who would be on my first team, who would be on my second team, and I would rank these players each time I did the rookie rank naturally by who I would put first on the ballot all the way down to who I would put 10th on the ballot. I can promise you, Aaron, going through that exercise, even though I don't have an official awards ballot, it's still incredibly excruciating, stressful, all those fun little adjectives you can throw out there, I promise. But my first team ended up being virtually the same as how the award shook out. So I also had Paolo Banchero, Jalen Williams, Walker Kessler, Keegan Murray, all in that order. I did actually have Jaden Ivey on my first team instead of Benedict Mathurin. And It's funny, the majority of the season, I think everyone had Paolo Banchero number 1, and they had Benedict Mathurin number 2, myself included, right?
Yep.
However, it got to a point where you watched Mathurin, and yes, he put up a bunch of points. He was able to score effectively off the bench and in an off-ball role, showed some more flashes as the season went on, doing a little bit more on the ball. But from a playmaking perspective, from a defense perspective, I don't feel like he really got better. I feel like Mathurin was the type of player who he kind of was who he was this season. I didn't really see him continue to make strides as the season went on. With all those other guys, I saw improvement in every single one of them, right? We saw Banchero continue to take more of the lion's share of the offense and be a true primary. Jalen Williams, what didn't he do for the Thunder? Right. Very much a similar story to Banchero. For Walker Kessler, he was one of the best rim protectors across the entire league. He was 4th in the entire NBA in total block shots as a rookie. That's ridiculous. And Keegan Murray set a rookie record for 3-pointers made in a season and was part of a team that made the 3rd seed in the Western Conference. So all 4 of those guys showed growth. I thought Jaden Ivey also showed growth for the Pistons, and it's why I wanted that's why I wanted to reward him, man. That's why I wanted to put him on my first team. I wanted to reward a guy who was put in a situation. Cade Cunningham obviously went down due to injury. He wasn't expected to be the point guard and really the focal point of that offense, yet he embraced that role and he continued to get better. He turned weaknesses into strengths. Did he improve on the defensive end? No, he didn't do that either. But from taking over duties as an off-ball player next to a star versus coming in and actually being the man and helping to organize the offense and really improve parts of his offensive game to make himself a more productive player, I wanted to reward him. And then he also had a stretch of games this year from February and on where he was scoring double digits virtually every game. He was certainly one of the bright spots for Detroit and someone who we're going to look to as a potential future star. So I wanted to reward Ivy and have him on my first team.
Hey, I understand that completely, and I noticed that as well as far as the growth in his game. I think the two aspects of his game where he really grew a whole bunch were decision making, number
Hmm.
one, and that touch is number two. So
Yep.
the floater game, the in between game, earlier on, he kind of got a little bit ahead of himself in that middle area, tried to get all the way to the rim, got stifled in there. That's a challenge for players like Jaden Ivey that come in and have all that athleticism. Got to learn how to harness it. Got to learn how to use it in the
Yep.
right spots. He came in, guys do a lot of this. They're going at one speed. And Ivy eventually learned, he's like, all right, I can't always be at 100 miles an hour. Sometimes you have to regulate your speed a little bit, go a little bit more half speed, catch the defense off guard, and explode. So he really grew in that aspect. And the in between shot for him is going to be extremely key, just like it
Yep.
is for guys like John Morant and guys of that build that come in and the defense knows that, hey, you're a high riser, but we're not going to let you get all the way to the rim. What can you do between 10, 15 feet from the basket? So I think that part of his game really came along. And sure, the defense isn't there yet. There's plenty of time for that to come around. And that's not really that important right now for a Pistons team that's at the bottom of the standings. I'm sure they're not going to be, hurting for a few points given up by Ivy right now.
Sure.
But long term, you got to be encouraged by what he displayed for the Pistons. And I think they got a great player. Is he going to be John Morant? I mean, who knows?
Who knows?
Maybe that's kind of like a high thing to put on him right now. But I think at least he's going to be a guy that can come in and be a long-term starter, at least be in the all-star conversation, be a high-level player that's a good counterbalance to Cade Cunningham
Yep.
with the way he's more methodical and takes the game a little bit slower. Having that kind of yin-yang effect in the backcourt, I think is going to be really fun for the Pistons. So I'm with you, man. I think Ivy had a great season. And there's definitely a case for him to be on that first team because he displayed a lot of great qualities throughout the season.
Thankfully, he wasn't a snub overall, though.
Right,
Thankfully.
right. Yeah, at least we can look at that. That was definitely some good news for him. So moving on to the second team, this was really interesting as well. I think there might be a few more players that we can talk about being in the mix for second team that didn't quite make it. But just to put it out there real quick here, it was Jaden Ivey, who we just talked about in that first team, Tari Eason, Jeremy Sochan, Jabari Smith Jr., and Jalen Duren, another fellow Piston that made the second team over there. So all of them had great seasons. I mean, we can go on and on about what they contributed, but they all did some great things for their teams. Jeremy in particular for the Spurs, I mean, he had a really nice
I
run
love it.
towards the
Yep.
end. Those last 20 games or so were awesome. Like, is this the next ultimate Swiss Army knife, like a Draymond Green type of guy that could just come in and do a little bit of this, a little bit of that? He really saved my butt in fantasy a couple of times. There's a guy in my league that dropped him. I looked at Jeremy and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a flyer because I think this guy can really put up some numbers in the expanded minutes where Pop released the beast, so to speak, and he was playing like 25, 30 minutes, especially.
Did you have him when he put up that 29-point game? Was he on your team then?
I think I did. Yep.
There you go.
So he really came through for me, man. I owe him a lot when it comes to my fantasy team, and I have him on my team, my dynasty team. So I'm going to hang on to him and watch him progress, and I can't wait to see what's next for him. But that entire team, I mean, they all have really different play styles. It's like Ivy, okay, he's just going to be all out, just explosive. Jalen Duren is going to get dirty, get on the boards, get some blocks. Jabari Smith is going to be the typical, prototypical floor spacer, that 3-and-D type of number 4, that power 4 that can play there in Houston. Tari Eason, with the way he's everywhere. Like, I don't know how else to put it. He's just all over the court. And then we just talked about Jeremy here. So thoughts on second team from you, Nathan? What did you think about that, and any possible snubs for that team?
On my second team, I had so we're really close in terms of how I structured my team. So Benedict Mathurin was on my second team, Jabari Smith, Jalen Duren, and Jeremy Sohan. So those were 4 guys who, between those 2 teams, and obviously the 5 that we talked about, were right there in terms of my ballot matching up 9 out of 10 players. I did not have Tari Eason on my second team. He would have been my first quote unquote snub, or as I like to call them in my column, I would list out 5 or so honorable mentions at a bare minimum. I had Andrew Nemhard on my second team, and
I like it.
I'm actually really shocked that he did not make either of the all rookie teams. And I know a mentor of mine, shout out to Coach David Thorpe over at True Hoop, he actually had Andrew Nembhard on his first all-rookie team. And I couldn't get that bold. I couldn't quite get there. But I did actually rank him ahead of Benedict Mathurin on my ballot, right? So I would have had Benedict Mathurin at 7. I would have had Andrew Nembhard at 6. It's not that Andrew Nembhard was this crazy, awesome offensive player who was, putting out the same number of scoring outbursts, that somebody like a Mathurin did, but he did take command of that offense, right? He was one of their primary options to handle the ball with Tyrese Halliburton, or when Tyrese Halliburton was out due to injury. But he was also a massive defensive weapon for them, especially when that team was rolling, winning a lot of games, making some noise. We all thought, could the Indiana Pacers actually sneak into the playoff race in the Eastern Conference? They almost did. And in large part, it was because they had somebody like Nembhard to go to not only guard 1s and 2s, he was guarding some 3s. He was taking the other team's best perimeter matchup on a night-to-night basis as a rookie. So because he was carrying that workload on top of being able to and having to command the burden of pick and roll offense when he was in the game and having to make plays for others, as well as find ways how he fit into the offense, I just thought how much responsibility he was tasked with as a rookie, how consistent he was, how many games he played. I wanted to reward his production, which is why I put him ahead of Tari Eason. But if you wanted to make the argument for Tari Eason, absolutely make the argument. You look at his advanced numbers. I mean, he was still rating out, certainly not as good as he did at LSU in college last year, but you look at his advanced numbers, he was still putting up some crazy stats for a rookie. So in that department, I can't fault it. So that was really the only guy who I had as a major snub. I had him on my ballot versus he wasn't on the actual ballot. Some other honorable mentions I throw out there would be Shaedon Sharpe of the Portland Trailblazers. He's a guy who I probably thought when you asked me in December if I would have him on my final ballot, I probably would have told you yes. He unfortunately fell off a little bit. The Portland Trailblazers went more towards veterans as they got towards that middle of the season. Can we make a playoff push, or making moves around the trade deadline to get into the playoffs? What's going on with Dame? So that's kind of why he fell back a little bit, but still very high on him going forward. Malachi Branham had a great run for the San Antonio Spurs, especially in the second half of that season, showing some promise. Why I had him ranked as a lottery pick. AJ Griffin was an awesome guy for the Atlanta Hawks this year, shooting the ball incredibly well, showcasing that touch we all knew he had at Duke. And then he was a guy who was involved intermittently for the New Orleans Pelicans. But Dyson Daniels, when he was in the game, he was another one of these guys who was coming in and playing defense against some of the best players in the NBA and holding his own when he was in the lineup. So making a few strides offensively, still have plenty of work to go on that end, but showing that, hey, I'm 6'8", I got length, I'm quick, I can go out here and guard some of these guys and make an impact as a rookie. So those were some of my honorable mentions.
I love all those picks, man. And I want to go back to Nembhard for real quick just because of what he did for the Pacers. And I think the casual fan would look at that. It's like, you have him over Mathurin, and it's like, what is this dude talking about? Like, I don't even know who Andrew is, man. But if you go back and look at what he did in some of those games, really impressive performances, double doubles with points and assists. I mean, he's just a natural floor general. I mean, you look at the way he approaches the game and just kind of sees moves happening, kind of step ahead of the defense. And, he's not going to be the flashiest player. He's not going to make every highlight reel, but at the end of the day, he just knows how to play the game. He knows how to set up his teammates, and he's not afraid of that moment. So we also saw a lot of growth from him over the course of the season, which I think is worth acknowledging, and why he was at least an honorable mention for an All-NBA, or rather an All-Rookie team, just because of what he contributed to that Pacers team. It's going to be interesting going forward how they approach him playing, with Halliburton. Does it get to a point where they share together? Is he going to be primarily a backup next year? I just wonder how they approach that, because it's obvious he's a player. I mean, he's the real deal. I just wonder, it's like, are we going to give him more reps? Are we going to allow him to start, or is he going to continue to come off the bench here for a little bit? So that's going to be interesting to watch. But either way, he had a great season. I love what I saw from him. And there's other honorable mentions as well. Shaedon Sharpe was another great one. I had him on my list as well when I was jotting some notes down. The Blazers, it gives them an interesting decision in making that backcourt, with Shaedon Sharpe rising. It's like, hey, we just signed Simons for $100 million for 4 years. Do we ride that out? Sharpe is coming along. Do we prioritize his development? But those are good questions that are presented to that staff in Portland now. Now they have to kind of make a decision, but at least they have another guy coming up the pipeline. It made another lost season kind of worth it as far as drafting him number 7 overall. Love his athleticism. Love the way he kind of also learned how to tone it down a little bit and pick his spots a little bit better as time went along. So he's going to be another fun guy to watch. His shot creation abilities, I think, are starting to kind of come together, and he's learning how to kind of take advantage of his gifts. So
I wouldn't close the door on him either, potentially developing into a 3 that you could play next to Dame and Simons. I know it's not your quote unquote ideal positional alignment, but he is a big, strong 6'6". So I wouldn't rule that out for him either as he continues to get better on and off the ball defensively.
Good point. Good point. I mean, the NBA is ever evolving as far as positions go, so I wouldn't be surprised if he slid over. Plenty of guys have done that in the past. So they start in one position and they slide over and find success in that role. So definitely don't rule it out. That could happen for sure. So getting down to our last point here now, our last aspect of this conversation here, Nathan, it's going to be the draft lottery that is on the horizon. I'd say it's just about a week away or so. So that's exciting. It's coming up here not too far in the future. But there are a few tiebreakers that came up here that were announced. I think it was a few weeks ago now, as far as teams that finished with the same record, who gets priority, who gets what spot in the lottery. So the best odds in the lottery and all that good stuff. So the first one I wanted to look at here is the tiebreaker that the Rockets won over the Spurs. And that's probably the biggest one because as we know, we're in that top 3 range. So that matters a lot. The 1B sweepstakes is a real deal. So Houston can, at this point, they can't fall any lower than 6th. So the 6th pick is their worst case scenario. Highly doubt that happens, but just to put it out there, that's their situation. The Spurs, respectively, can't fall any lower than 7th. So for the Spurs, that's their worst case scenario. A little bit worse, but not a big difference there. So what I wanted to discuss with you, Nathan, while you're on here is where does each team go if they end up with that number 2 spot? Because we saw that discussion rage all season long. It was mainly towards the latter part of the college season. Scoot, Brandon Miller, where are we going with this? In my mind, I think it depends on who is at 2 as far as who gets drafted. Scoot made a lot of noise, but so did Brandon at the latter part of the season. So I'm interested to see what you think if it's Houston at 2, who gets selected? If it's another team at 2, does it change who's drafted? What do you think about each of those guys? I guess to put it out there, did you have Scoot all the way through? Did you maintain him at number 2? Did you ever kind of waver in that ranking system you had going? How did you feel about that?
I have not wavered on Scoot Henderson being my number 2 overall prospect. To me, there are only 2 teams that I would make the argument for, okay, I would actually sit down, have a conversation. Maybe we end up taking Brandon Miller 2nd overall because he is also the 3rd player on my board. There's no mystery behind that. So those 2 teams, I would make the argument for Charlotte and I would make the argument for Portland because, yes, Scoot Henderson, in my opinion, can play off of other lead guards like that, but you don't want to rock the boat in Charlotte with LaMelo Ball. And Dame Lillard, yes, you can bring in Scoot, but you already have all those backcourt options like we talked about. And it's a different dynamic for Portland as well, right? Damian Lillard, you can make a statistical argument he's a top 10 point guard of all time. And that's just that's the type of player who, as an organization, he's going to be putting fans in stands. He's obviously the type of player that he is, brings excitement to the franchise. You don't necessarily just push him out the door either if he doesn't want to leave. So that in my mind would be, if you're committed to Dame and Dame's committed to you, you can take a guy like Brandon Miller and you're still going to get a great asset for you on the wing at a position of need. And then in Charlotte, like I said, I wouldn't necessarily look to rock the boat with LaMelo Ball, would still ride that one out. Brandon Miller could check a number of boxes for you as well. But any of these other teams, including the Rockets or the Spurs, I don't see another player on these rosters who's going to impede me from taking Scoot and potentially even starting him and giving him a legitimate lion's share of the offense in his rookie season, because I feel by his talent, he's that good, right? For G League Ignite this year, he was still almost 18 points per game, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 1 steal, 44% from the field, close to at that average mark, 32.4% from 3, 75 from the free throw line. I get, Aaron, that some people would want that 3-point shot to be higher, but what people also don't fully understand sometimes is that these guys coming in, these prospects, the average shooting mark across guys, whether it's in college or whether it's guys coming from overseas, it's about 30 to 31% from 3-point range. So at that rate, he's actually treading water pretty well with his peers. And if you look at his shooting mechanics and how he's progressed on that end, how comfortable he is taking those pull-up type threes, how comfortable he is operating in the mid-range, I'm buying the shot and the touch long-term. That, to me, is not something I'm worried about. You take a look at how he operates out of the pick and roll, how poised he is, how mature he is, how physically developed he is at that spot already. There are just way too many boxes for me that he checks. And I think the most important point, Aaron, that I can talk about, it's not about something you're finding on film on the court. It's about who he is as a person. I truly believe in Scoot's leadership capabilities, and he's someone where if I have a number 2 or even extend it to the top 3, right? If I have a top 3 pick, it means my team is in a position where unless something catastrophic happened where I'm in a position like Golden State that I can draft that high because my whole team got injured at some point throughout the year, you're probably lacking that type of leader within your franchise, right? I'm not talking about at the coaching spot. I'm not talking about in the front office, but on the court, you're lacking that extension of your coach. And I fully trust Scoot Henderson to be that guy for your franchise.
I'm with you. You watch him play and you listen to what scouts have said about him and the way he approaches the game. He's got that dog in him.
Yes.
You hear that all the time. You hear it all the time. I mean, it's a popular saying and it's kind of cliche at this point, but hey, I mean, it describes him. It's the way he plays, and he plays to win. He's not out there to get the highlights or to have the spotlight on him at all times. It's like, hey, I'm trying to win the game. That's the main mission out here. And you can't say enough great things about players like that. I feel players like that, even if they don't have the skill set to be a superstar, are going to be successful. If you add in the tools that Scoot has, and you mentioned his 3-point shot is not a complete disaster relative to his peers that get drafted. You add that into the equation, you're looking at a surefire, I mean, hey, he's going to be a starting point guard for a long time. I mean, does he become the next great point guard? Maybe not. But at the number 2 spot, you want someone you can invest in for a long time. You know you're in the right direction. You know they're going to get you wins, put you in a position to be in the playoffs to win a championship. So I'm with you. I didn't waver either, even though Brandon made those strides, and I think he's going to be a great selection as well, no matter where he goes. There's just certain things about Scoot you can't teach, and that in itself can separate a guy, from being 3, from being 2, from being 1 at the end of the day. So,
and just think about like the coaches who are also in positions with those picks when we talk about the Rockets or the Spurs, right? An Ime Udoka for Houston, or a Greg Popovich for San Antonio. These are 2 guys who they want extensions of themselves on the floor. You may had that up in Boston. He had that with a guy like Marcus Smart, who preached every single thing that he wanted taught on the court. Greg Popovich had a leader for years, not only in Tim Duncan, but at the point guard spot, he had Tony Parker, who certainly believed every single thing that Pop was preaching on a daily basis. I bet both of those coaches would love to have a leader on the court like Scoot Henderson, who, oh, by the way, he's still pretty dang good at what he does from a basketball perspective too.
No doubt about it. So that race is fascinating. Obviously, we got to keep tabs on that 1, 2, 3 all the way through. That's kind of been a hot topic all through the season, and it won't stop anytime soon. However, there was some noise down a little bit farther down the lottery. We can't discuss every single tiebreaker on this podcast, but another one I wanted to cover here with you, Nathan, on this podcast was the situation between the Bulls and the Thunder. 2 more teams that also finished with a similar record in their respective conference. So what ended up happening is the Bulls won that tiebreaker over the Thunder. So the Bulls did get 11. However, their pick is top 5 protected, which means it's going to go to the Magic. So with the Magic armed with another pick, I mean, I know we didn't plan on talking about the Magic in this podcast, but man, you got to be excited about their future with all these young guys already on the roster, more young talent coming in. They can do so many things at this point. You can consolidate. You can go try to find more talent if you're ready to win. You have a rookie of the year, a budding star. You have some great pieces at almost every position. I mean, what more can you ask for if you're a Magic fan? So, I mean, I wanted to acknowledge that real quick just because they have one of the best young cores in the NBA, I think, hands down.
They do. I mean, you have Paulo Banchero and Franz Wagner already ready to go to build around. Right now, you're talking about 2 potential top 11 picks. You can go out there. You can get some help on the front line. You can get a Cam Whitmore or Taylor Hendricks with one of those picks. You can go get some help in the backcourt as well. You can go the route of a Cason Wallace, Keontae George. Maybe you want some perimeter shooting help, period. Guys who are viewed more off the ball, but you have 2 primaries who can handle the ball in Paolo and Franz. Maybe you go after a guy like a Jordan Hawkins or a Grady Dick, or maybe you continue to build on your strength, which is your size in the front court. You get somebody who can play behind a Wendell Carter Jr., can play behind a Bol Bol. Maybe you go get a really interesting player like a Derek Lively or a Leonard Miller. So there's just so many different directions they could go to continue building out their team. But I also think because of where their picks are structured and the types of players that are likely available in those spots, they could be in one of these fascinating positions, very similar to the team we're going to talk about in the Thunder in a second, where you can add to your team's identity in a major way with lottery talent, not just back end of the first round talent.
Right. No, that's a great point. So, I mean, overall, the Magic have pretty much everything. I think they just need to add on the margins a little bit and just let that internal growth kind of carry them to the next level. I mean, they're already set up to be a great team next season. So that's fascinating to watch. Getting to the Thunder here now, they did lose that tiebreaker, pushed them to 12. However, they already had a successful season. This is just icing on the cake. I don't think they're really disappointed about losing one spot in the draft. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. Looking at their current talent pool, the way they almost broke into the playoffs for virtue of the play-in, having number 12, not a bad thing at all. I mean, they stick in the lottery. So, I mean, missing the playoffs could be a blessing in disguise for them. One more year, kind of grooming that young talent could be a blessing for them. So they have so many options at that range. And the sense I'm getting from this draft, looking at how guys have been ranked, is you have the top end talent. Those guys are not moving. You have probably that second tier, the Jarris Walkers and the Thompson twins and guys like that. After that, it's kind of like, once you get to like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, I feel like there's a lot of, you can really get creative with who you select at each spot. I think it comes down to need at that point. It's like, hey, you need a shooter, Grady's on the board. You're looking for a little bit more of the defensive touch with offensive upside. Taylor Hendricks is on the board for you. You're looking for that defensive versatility. I mean, Rupert's on the board. So it's like there's so many options there. And I just kept wrecking my brain about who would the Thunder pick, but I just kind of gave up because the Thunder, they've shown us in the last couple of years, there's no telling who they'll pick. They'll grab a guy and you're like, I didn't see that coming, but we'll ride with it. And then all of a sudden it's like J-Dub, almost wins Rookie of the Year, or Jalen Williams, the J Will comes off the bench and he's doing great things. He's starting in the playing games at center. I mean, like the Thunder front office, I think they're just kind of wacky with how they draft guys, but it always seems to work for them somehow. So not sure who you're thinking as far as who might be on the board for them. Might be kind of hard to say at this point, but I mean, they have a variety of options and it really just comes down to what they're trying to fill. So maybe a center in there, center's been a little bit of a weak point for them, but I can't wait to see what they do because that front office is on point with their drafting here recently.
Well, Aaron, yourself and everyone else had no trade clause. The Oklahoma City Thunder are kind of what you guys live for, right? To break down their current situation, their roster flexibility in terms of they have a lot of guys who we think are going to be on the roster next year. They have some non-guaranteed deals. They still have some options they can play around with. So there's a little bit of roster flexibility that they have. But for the most part, like I just said, we expect a lot of their names to ultimately be there. And they have all of these draft picks. So eventually there comes to a point where they're another team that has multiple picks in this draft. They have plenty of picks, as we know, beyond this draft. This is the one team you look at and you say, do you consolidate assets at this point in time? And you go move up for the player that you want to add. And you make this player that you can take top 5, top 6, top 7, depending on how much you want to spend to get up higher in the draft. Is at the point where you look at that player and you say, this is our final building block. This is what we're going to move towards the future with. And now at this point, now that we have this foundation in place, this is when we start making additional moves to really bring in the type of veteran talent we want around a Shea, a Giddey, a J-Dub, Chet Holmgren, throw in X draft pick here. I think this is the team. If there's any team who would move up, in my opinion, this should be the team to do it. Because to your point, Aaron, you look at some of the players who are available in that range. Maybe you go with like a Derek Lively or a Leonard Miller because you want to add size next to Chet. Even though those two, they aren't the two bulkiest, biggest guys, right? They still are legitimate 7'1" in the case of Derek Lively. Leonard Miller, I think, is going to continue to grow and fill out and become stronger. Maybe you go with versatile size to add next to Chet Holmgren as he comes back. Maybe you go with more shooting support, right? I've kind of compared Jordan Hawkins to a bigger Isaiah Joe. We saw how Isaiah Joe worked out for the Thunder when they picked him up from my team, the 76ers, that I'm a fan of, and we just cut him. And I was swearing up and down social media, why did we do that? But nevertheless, he found a good home in Oklahoma City. Do you go with somebody like that? Do you take a flyer on somebody like Bilal Coulibaly, who has emerged as one of my favorite one of my favorite draft prospects, honestly, in general? You could take a number of flyers in that range, or you can trade up and get an ingredient. Like, to me, the best fit would be like a Jarris Walker or a Taylor Hendricks. You can go the route of a Cam Whitmore. Those three guys, in my opinion, it may cost you quite a few assets to move up and get one of those guys, but where I have them graded on my board versus where you kind of move down to, the gap in talent to me is significant enough to where if I believe that one of those guys is a missing link and we can really start to move forward in the Western Conference, get within that top 8, maybe even challenge for a top 6 spot and continue to build forward, why not make this the time to go do something like that? So that's what I think they should do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think it's just a matter of when they decide to consolidate. This would be a great time for sure with the way this draft is looking, with the strength, the depth of this draft. You can't really go wrong. I was of the same opinion. At some points, like, you have to cash in. You can't use all these picks. You can't use all 55 picks that you have over the next 7 years. You just get to a point where it's just too much. So yeah, I mean, whether it's this year or what in the off season, who knows? But regardless, they're definitely going to have to consolidate. I think the time is coming. They know that they're on the cusp of something great. You can see the flashes this season. You can see the Williamses come out to do their thing. Their other draft pick, Osman Dang, that came out and played spot minutes, but he has something to offer with his size and possible versatility. And, of course, Chet, with the way he contributes on the court. I mean, all around, they just have so many players that can do great things for them. So if they do decide to cash in, I think it's going to be for a surefire guy they believe can really help them get to the next level, that can be that number 2 next to Shea, make a lot of noise. So, yeah, I mean, this is a great time to be a fan of the Thunder and, honestly, just to be a fan in general, because what they do, the way they've built this team and not gone into a 5-year prolonged struggle at the bottom of the standings is really impressive. I think they only had about 2 years where they're towards the bottom and they're right back up, ready to compete. So kudos to that front office. They know what they're doing. So one last team I want to cover here, man. This is going to wrap up our podcast here, but the Mavericks, this is a fascinating situation here. As has been well documented at this point, the Mavericks pick is top 10 protected to the Knicks. So that's for this year. That's for next year. They will give a pick to the Knicks. It's just about when. I'm sure for that front office, they do not want it to be this year because they lost so much depth in that trade to get Kyrie Irving. They need guys to be able to step in and do the little things behind Luka, behind Kyrie. So for me, it's like they go one of two directions. You go for a wing to get a guy that can replace some of what Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock gave them in those minutes to kind of shore up the defense a little bit. And then also they can go with a guy that's off ball that can, get a lot of great shots for themselves off the catch. Maybe a Grady Dick type of player, a Jet Howard type of player. So I'm really interested to see where they go in that direction. Obviously, they can also use a big. Interior defense was a huge weakness for them. They got carved up. Kyrie and Luka already can't really stay in front of their man all that well. So you need to be able to have some backside support to help those guys out. So a lot of different directions. I hope they keep their pick because if they don't, it's going to be rough sledding for them. But a lot of different directions they go. Any thoughts on what the Mavs might do this summer if they do retain their pick in the top 10?
If they retain it, I have a strong feeling that they're going to move it and they won't ultimately make that selection. Now, me being a fan of the draft first and foremost, someone who quite literally puts his life into doing this work, I always believe that value can be found and potential star power can be found, no matter where you're choosing in the NBA draft. So if they were to keep this pick and make a selection, there's one wing in particular who it's more of a long shot, I think, than people would care to admit. But Bryce Sensabaugh to me really stands out as somebody who could have major star power next to someone like Luka, right? So it's not just what Bryce does on the ball, right? At Ohio State, he was a mid-range type shot maker. He could take some guys into the post. He could create a little bit for himself, but really as an off-ball weapon, someone who can hit shots in so many different ways, catch and shoot, off of movement, right? Spotting up. He can play out of pick and roll. He can do all of these different things for you, and his touch was tremendous no matter where he was shooting from. Even with some of his finishes at the rim where people looked at his numbers and they go, I want a little bit more from this guy if he's going to be a primary type shot creator, my second option on my team. I think if you flip some of those calls the other way, he draws a few more fouls, gets to the line where he's been an 80+% free throw shooter going all the way back to his time in high school. We may very well be having a different conversation about some of those numbers as well and pointing to this guy just scores from all over the floor, no matter where he is. And we also usually don't get to combine the terms shooter and score as much as we'd care to admit. So to me, you're getting so complete of an offensive talent who is built really well, 6'6", 235 pounds. I do think off the ball, there are certainly some defensive concerns, but I think on the ball, he plays his position well enough on that side of the ball to where you're also bringing in the offensive value and you're marrying those two together and you're looking at a guy who could be certainly a role player for you, someone who can do all of the same things that Dorian Finney-Smith did for that team, or Reggie Bullock. He can come in and be a clone of Tim Hardaway Jr., but he could also potentially be so much more for you alongside a Luka and a Kyrie. You need firepower in the Western Conference, especially with a team who unfortunately has not gone the way of developing and prioritizing defense. They are looking to outscore everyone. And if that's truly how you're going to play, why not go get one of the more complete offensive players, in my opinion, around that range in the draft in someone like Bryce Sensabaugh?
Yeah, I mean, that's a guy I hadn't really thought of for that team, but I can see how it would work. Losing Spencer Dinwiddie and what he brought to that team, losing Jalen Brunson, those two on-ball creators that can really kind of take the pressure off of Luka. They definitely missed that a little bit. Obviously, you get Kyrie in return, so it helped a little bit. But what Bryce brings to the court, I mean, I'm totally in agreement with you. One of the comparisons I saw was a TJ Warren as far as the way he plays the game. Obviously, not the current iteration of TJ Warren. He's dropped off a little bit from his Pacer days. But, you know, if you think about the prime, shall we say, TJ Warren, the way he was a 3-level scorer, that's something that Bryce can definitely look to as a part of his game and the way he could contribute to that team. And it would be a huge benefit. Let's say non-Luka minutes, non-Kyrie minutes. That's definitely something they can look for a little extra production. So I like that as well. But I think what makes the Mavericks situation so fascinating is that there's so many options. And I think it says a lot about what they lost in the trade as far as how many different needs they need to address in the offseason. Rim protection, secondary bench scoring, wing defenders, just a lot of different places to where they can use another body or two. They're not going to be able to address all of those unless they just, you know, pull a rabbit out of the hat or something. But at least if they do have this pick, they retain it, they can draft it, or they can move it, as you mentioned before, because, you know, a top 10 pick is still worth quite a bit in this league as far as trade value. So we'll have to keep an eye on what the Mavs do from here. Really fascinating to see who they use to kind of build around Luka, because the clock is already ticking. It doesn't take much for a player to ask out these days, and with their leverage, the pressure is on. So they got to get this right.
If you had the opportunity to make the pick for Dallas, right? And I'm not necessarily asking you to name a player, but one of their biggest areas of need, I feel like I would also lean towards defense and rim protection. But if you're making a top 10 selection and you're trying to sell Luka on keeping the pick and choosing somebody who, yeah, they may be young, but they can come in and certainly play a role for you, don't you feel like it's easier to sell Luka on picking someone like a Bryce, or even somebody who you know you're going to get offense from, like a Grady or whatever the case may be, versus going the route of a Derek Lively, who maybe you and I would look at, but I'm just kind of looking at it from a practical sense that maybe that's probably what they would do.
That makes sense. I mean, if you're Luka, it's like, hey, who can come in and who has that ceiling? I think that's kind of the point you're getting at more than anything. It's like, who has the highest ceiling?
Who can help me right now get points on the board? Yep.
Exactly. I don't care about potential. I'm a top 10 player in the NBA, and this team is 1 year removed from a Western Conference Finals berth. We're looking for, and Kyrie is in his 30s. I mean, it's like, hey, the time is now to make something happen. So when you put it that way, it definitely makes sense as far as what the Mavs are looking for. So those are some great points for sure, man. But I don't want to keep it too much longer here, Nathan. We had a great discussion here this evening. I really enjoyed kind of covering all this with you, the playoff aspect of it, as well as recent draftees, upcoming draftees. This is going to be a fascinating draft. So I'll definitely be tuning in to No Ceilings to see what you guys are putting out. And I will say for everybody, definitely check out No Ceilings. If you're on Twitter, check out their website. I've been referring to it myself, getting familiar with this draft, kind of catching up on all the guys coming through. So they have a great resource over there. Definitely want to give them a shout out as far as what they're providing to the NBA community as far as draft content. So Nathan, thanks again for joining this podcast. It's been a great time. Love what you guys are doing. Keep up the great work, and hope to continue to collaborate with you going forward.
Absolutely, Aaron. Certainly one and the same. Love it. Collaboration between No Ceilings and No Trade Clause. What could be better?
100%, man. Dynamic duo. Let's get it going.
Absolutely.
Jack and Kobe.
Yes, sir.
That's the goal. If you guys are looking for draft capital, cap sheets, things like that, all of our podcast episodes, we do have all that up over on notradeclause.com. So definitely refer to our website, as it will be updated here many times over the next couple of months, with the draft lottery coming up here, with the actual draft coming up in just a little over a month here, free agency. We'll be on top of all the deals that are going down, all of the draft picks traded, all the signings, the cuts, you name it, we'll be on top of it. So be sure to check out our website, bookmark it, so you don't miss anything going forward into the NBA offseason and going forward from there. So thanks again, everybody, for joining this podcast. We really enjoyed having you guys on. Be sure to keep it locked here. We got more pods coming up here soon with all the what's going on in the NBA, and we hope you will join us for all of it. So until next time, guys, really enjoy this rest of this NBA season here. Enjoy these playoffs, and we'll catch you on the next installment of NTC. Take care.